We are living in a time, when you think about it, that there's a tremendous amount of things happening. And one of the interesting things about it is that it happens with such speed. Every day, we wake up in the morning and all of a sudden there's something that happened that's tremendously either catastrophic or significant. And of course everybody, I'm sure everybody walks around asking themselves, how do we really understand all this? I'm sure that's really what's going on, And the truth is that all of this, in many ways, they're all connected, really. The only thing is that they look so separate that you don't really see the connection. And that's what I try to do, to connect, as they say, to connect all the dots, which is really the only way to get an understanding of what is happening. The question is, how do you connect the dots? Because you have stuff going on. I mean, for instance, you have America, we had the impeachment of Trump, and then we have the peace plan, and you have Brexit, and you have China, then you have Iran, Soleimani, then of course Eretz Israel. They don't seem to be able to get their act together and put together a government. So the question is, everybody deep down in some way realizes there has to be some type of an inner plan, an inner agenda that is really responsible for this. In order to understand that, however, what you really have to have is an understanding of the divine agenda, because that's really what's happening. There are different ways of understanding history, Most people understand history either descriptively, when we all learned history, it was names, dates, places, and so on, And of course, historians try to understand those principles of history, and the way they understand it, of course, is it's either military reasons or cultural reasons or scientific reasons or political and so on, But the truth is that we know that the reasons that historians speak about are not the ultimate reasons. They are really what's called intermediate reasons. In other words, what's behind everything is the divine plan. Except God uses a lot of these things, military reasons and cultural and scientific and political and so on, in order that his agenda be fulfilled. So therefore, without an understanding of a divine agenda, you really, in many ways, you really cannot know what's going on. Because the ultimate reasons are not these things. So therefore, what I'd like to do, of course, and which is I've been doing it actually for quite a while, more than 4 years, ever since Trump came down that elevator, on June 15th, 2015, is trying to connect all the dots. It's been in many ways, it's very challenging, I have to say, to be able to grasp a historical event at a different level and so on. In a certain sense, it's been very, very rewarding, and so far I'm batting a great average, as they say, So therefore, in many ways, like I say, it's challenging, it's rewarding, but the key idea of all of this is not just to figure out what's going on for its own sake, but we witness today something which is very important. The Jews have been in Golus for 2,000 years, and as the Golus is prolonged, what happens is the Jewish people begin to have a tremendous weakening of their faith, emunah, and bitochen, and trust in God, because they see things going on today, which is the opposite of what the Torah says about God and his agenda. We see evil prosper all the time. We see tremendous, like I say, Rishonim having a great time. We see a lot of righteous people suffering, you see. And I'm not even talking about the wars of mankind, and the evil perpetrated by mankind, So we as we continue to live, we are faced with tremendous challenges to our belief and our bitochen. So therefore the question is, well, what do? Well, you could read Svarim, that talk about Bitochen and Emunah, like the Chovis Halvavos. These are famous Svarim, the Orchos Tzadikim, and so on. Or you can stay there in confusion and you don't really know what to do. But when you think about it, something which I've realized, one of the greatest ways to mechazek, to strengthen your faith and trust in God, is by seeing the hand of God. You see it. You see? So you realize that God has not abandoned us at all. On the contrary, He moves, but very silently and very concealed. That's true. But beyond it all, behind it all, there is the hand of God. So that is one of the ways, actually, it's one of the most powerful ways to be mechazik your emunah, to strengthen your faith and trust in God. And that, in the end, is really my motive. The reason why I do this kind of stuff. It's not just to produce tapes or videos. It's not entertainment. If it was, I would charge a whole different set of prices. If it was entertainment, right? At least $10,000 a year, right? That's what the Hollywood guys get. But the reason why I do it is to mechazek the emunah of the Jewish people, because in many ways it's in the pits. What can I tell you? Even though we forget about the Jews that are gone, but even the Jews that are religious, it's very bad, because there's a tremendous chalisha, weakening, you see, of faith and trust in God. And it's a tremendous mitzvah, to strengthen that aspect of a Jew. Very great mitzvah. Is that as you get closer to the redemption, it gets darker. Last week I gave a shir that was called Why Evil Persists. I gave several shurim and so on, which tries to explain why is it as you get closer to the redemption, it gets worse, darker, and the ultimate reason I gave that shir, explaining why it gets worse, why it must get worse before the redemption itself. So I would certainly encourage everybody to check out that shir, to listen to that and so on. But today's shir is really going to dwell on current events, because there's so much stuff happening. It's just incredible. But the interesting thing is it's not just stuff that's happening. The stuff that's happening is earth-shattering. I mean, this coronavirus is a real danger to the entire world economy, and so on. What we're witnessing in Eretz Yisrael is historical. Never happened before. Imagine 2 elections, and there's going to be a 3rd election in 2 weeks, and it's going to wind up to be the exact same thing. No government, nothing, and then you have the impeachment of a sitting president with no charges at all, which is insane. And the Democratic Party has now become psychotic. They're now eligible for free psychiatric care. The Democratic Party, which is just absolutely astounding, and we have many other, there's a whole infestation of locusts. We have now been revisited by the Makkah of Arba, like what in the world is going on here? So that's what I would like to try to explain. But remember, it's based on the divine agenda. Other than that, there is no real explanation, other than the fact that everybody's crazy. What other explanation is there, and so on. In any case, so to get into this stuff, there's certain things which I have mentioned in the past, over the years and so on, but it bears again mentioning, because in many ways it's the introduction. It is a necessary, what's called introduction, to understand what is happening. Now, one of the things which we have to know, which many people make a mistake, is the Messianic era itself. Because when you think about it, all of this is leading up to that era. So then the question, of course, is, what is that era basically? So, just to give you a feel of that, there's a pasuk in Yeshayahu Hanovi. It's a Perek Nun Beis, I think it's pasuk Ches, whatever. And it says the following: Hine Yaskel Avdi, behold, my servant will grow wise. And then it says, V'yorum, and he will grow. V'nisa, become great. V'gova mi'oid, and he will become exceedingly great. Who is this servant that obviously goes through these phases? So, there's, of course, there's different views. Some people hold that it is the Jewish people itself, that they will become great in the end of time, which obviously makes a lot of sense. But Kabbalistically, and even the Targum says Malka Mashiach. The pasuk is referring to the Mashiach, really specifically, basically Mashiach ben Yosef, and therefore it says Hine Yaskel Avdi, my servant will grow wise. Means the Mashiach will grow wise. What does that mean? Without getting into the whole thing, because Mashiach, in a certain sense, is in a prison, not a literal prison, but a figurative prison, which I've spoken before, that the Mashiach himself suffers a great deal in order to alleviate the suffering of the Jewish people. He is a partner with the suffering. Without going into why, I once spoke about that and so on, And the pasuk is saying, Hine Yaskel Avdi, he will grow. He finally gets out of prison. It's a figurative prison, not a literal prison. It's the impediments that blocks him ends. And that's really the Aschalta de Gula, in any case. And it says that he will grow. So the Medrash asks, well, it says he will grow. What does that mean? So the Medrash posits an incredible concept that when he gets out of his prison, he will grow to be greater than Avram Avinu. Now, we don't know what Avram Avinu was. He's a legend in that sense, He's the first of the others. And obviously he defied the entire planet in the belief of one God. And he also went into the burning furnace. And then the Akedah. Who could understand Avram Avinu? Obviously he's one of the greatest Jews who ever lived. Yet this man, the Mashiach ben Yosef, will be greater than Avram Avinu. Then it says Nisa, and he will rise, which means he will be greater than just great. So the Medrash asks, well, what does that mean? So the Medrash says something which is hard to believe. It says that he will be greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, you don't get greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. Could you imagine if Moshe Rabbeinu came into your living room and sat down? You'd probably run away. You could never tolerate that man's holiness. Here's a person who spoke to God throughout the whole Chumash. Can you imagine? That was the person that Moshe Rabbeinu, the being that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to. We cannot imagine this person. He's the greatest of all the Nevi'im, of the prophets, and so on. His relationship to God is beyond comprehension. You see? So the Mashiach is greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. And then it has a last verse, where it says, V'gova mi'oid, and he will be exceedingly great. So the Mendel asks, well, who's after that? Right? Who's greater than Moshe Rabbeinu? You see? So the Mendel answers, he will be greater than the Malachim, angels. You can imagine a guy walking around who's greater than Michael, Gabriel. It's beyond belief. In many ways, he's not human in that sense, although he is in human clothing, so to speak. He's a human being. But we cannot even imagine that. So this is a person that's going to redeem the Jewish people. Imagine that. So God is sending somebody, he's not on the bottom of the list. He is the top of humanity. In fact, he's the greatest person who ever lived in order to bring down the next thing. What does he bring down? What does he do? Now, most people think the Messianic era, basically, it's an era when all things bad will not happen. It means everybody will have a parnasa, right? Everybody will be healthy, livelihood, peace, no more wars. The economy will be fabulous, nobody dies and all that and so on. There's no health problems, So they all think that it's what they would call in English utopia, you see. But when you think about that, that's not what he does. Just to create a utopia, which is a planet devoid of, really terrible things, that's not what the Mashiach is about. That's that could be, I think, a non-Jewish version of what could happen. But that's not the version that we believe in. What do we believe? So there's a Medrash at the end of, it's a Medrash Rabbi, at the end of Koheles that says something which is, for us, it's almost impossible to understand. It says that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu gave us, which is what? It's the Babylonian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, it's all the Rishonim, the Achronim, all the commentaries, all the hundreds of thousands of Sfarim ever written, right? That's the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Medrash says that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is everything we have, is Hevel, Luft, air, compared to the Torah of the Mashiach. It's astounding. All we have is the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. So how could something, the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, be no substance? Because air has no substance. That means it is so inferior to the Messianic Torah, right, that it's just beyond comprehension. Yet that's what it is. So we are going to be living in a generation in which the Torah that the Mashiach will teach is not another Torah. Don't think it's another one. It is the Torah of Moshe, except it is at a level of depth that is incomprehensible. You see, if you want, you could compare it to science in 1640, right? There were scientists then. They had things going on, right? But you compare it to science in 2020, it's primitive. That's exactly what the Mashiach ben Yosef, even though it's the same framework, the same science, in that sense, So we will be living in the presence of an individual, and the atmosphere, the environment will be such where it will be incomprehensible. The amount of holiness, the amount of knowledge of God, like it says, Ki molorets deo, and the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God. You see, Ki molorets deo means the entire world is filled with the knowledge of God. That means God is no more located in a place like the Beis Hamikdash. His presence pervades all reality. And that is the Messianic era. So it's incredible. So the Messianic era is an era of unparalleled spirituality that we cannot even comprehend. I'm not even talking about that there's no death or anything else. It is something that we cannot imagine. You see, if you took a guy, from the 12th century CE, 800 years ago, right, and you brought him into Manhattan, Fifth Avenue, in 2020, he would collapse. He couldn't imagine what was going on. The difference in 800 years between the knowledge of mankind then and now is beyond comprehension. That's exactly the metaphor that you could use for the Messianic era. We cannot comprehend what it is. In fact, the Chazal call it Chevle Mashiach. Imagine a child before it's born, right? It's a hotel, right? Gets all its food whenever it wants. It's warm, it's snug, it's great, right? And it's protected, doesn't feel anything about the world. And then all of a sudden, after the birth, the kid comes out, what a rude awakening. It's a whole different world that it could never comprehend while it was inside. You see? It's the same idea. That's why it's Chevle Mashiach, the birth pangs of the Mashiach. When the Mashiach comes, it'll be a world that we cannot envision at the present time. Now that Medrash continues, by the way, and says that the Torah of the Mashiach, of which we cannot comprehend, right, that is Hevel, is air compared to the Torah of Olam Haba. So we got problems of understanding the era of the Mashiach. Olam Haba, there's not even a comparison to the environment of Olam Haba, which of course is beyond comprehension. So this really is what the Messianic era is all about, which is very important. Okay. Now the question is this. Okay, so this man was going to introduce this type of environment, right? How in the world is he going to come to this world? I've said many times that he's the most dangerous person in the world, because you cannot suffer, you cannot bear. You cannot bear that type of kedusha. It's over with. And what he will wind up doing is killing everybody, which is exactly what happened by Yamsa, by Matan Torah. They all heard the word of God and they all died because they could not bear the unbelievable holiness of that Torah that God gave them. You see? So then what is God going to do? And the answer to that is that there has to be a hachana, a prep. There has to be a preparation for this. Jews cannot enter that type of domain with this individual and this environment. It's impossible. That's a very important idea, you see. And the truth is that the Torah says that. The Torah says that at the end of Dvarim, if your exiles be at the end of heaven, and that's end of heaven means that, you're in Zimbabwe, or whatever, you're all over the place, right? God will gather all the Jews, everyone, right? And He will take you at the end of time, you see. So that is the guarantee that the exile will leave no one behind. That's what it means, and so on, But the question, of course, is how's that possible? When you look at the world today, the Jewish population, there's 11 million people that are gone, Jews, that are gone. Between assimilation and intermarriage and unaffiliation, they're really all gone. So how God is going to do that is one of the greatest mysteries of all. How do you do that? And so on, But nonetheless, that's what it says that He will do. Very important. Where do we see this? Because you see this from Egypt. Egypt, by the way, is the model of the redemption itself. It's very important. If you study Egypt and how it happened, then you will understand the redemption. But it's not easy to study Egypt, you see. And the idea to that, because it says, Hine go alti eschem achros courageous. We say that in the Kedusha, that behold, I will redeem you. The last redemption will be like the first, which is Egypt. Now, so if you study the Egyptian redemption, you can get a feeling, an inkling of what's going to happen. When the Jews, they were slaves for hundreds of years. And God, of course, decided to terminate that slavery. So He did it not by natural means. He did it by completely supernatural means. Totally, when the 10 plagues and so on, they're all supernatural. And so on. And that's how He did it. But all He did was free them. But that's a million miles from Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. You see. So what God had to do is to bring them from here to here, spiritually, not just free them from slavery, but He had to change the character of the Jew to become a spiritual giant, or else they could not accept the Torah. And even then, they all died. Could you imagine the Torah? The Torah, by the way, that was given at Har Sinai initially, before the sin of the golden calf, was the Messianic light. What we talk about, right now, Hine Yaskel Avdi, that the Torah of the Mashiach was the Torah that was given at the Matan Torah, at the giving of the Torah. Of course, after the sin of the golden calf, it was substantially reduced. So therefore, they had to have a hachana, a preparation. Where was the preparation? Well, think about that. The Jews, the Egyptians are being slaughtered by the Maccas. But the Jews, what they do, they witnessed all this. But what is important to know is that each Makkah represents an unbelievable spiritual illumination of one sphera. There were 10 Maccas, 10 spheres. A sphera is the energy output or the forces that God uses, to create realities. So therefore, each Makkah represented one sphera, one incredible divine illumination, and the Jews not only saw the Makkah, but they saw the illumination itself. So the entire year, because the Maccas took 1 year, the entire length of time was witnessing unbelievable spiritual insights. That was one. Then the second thing was when it says that and darkness, and for all the Jews there was light in their dwelling. That light wasn't light; it was an unbelievable spiritual insight. So that's the second hachana. The third hachana is the Yamsuf, the Kriyas Yamsuf. And it says in the Chazal That what? That a maidservant saw more of the divine light, right, secrets, than Yecheskel Hanavi saw. And by the way, Kabbalah is based on Yecheskel. So they were greater than Yecheskel Hanavi. A handmaiden, right, was greater than Ezekiel the prophet. Unbelievable. So that's a third Hachana, you see. And then the fourth Hachana, preparation, is the 49 days. Now we don't know what took place in those 49 days. You know, they weren't just sitting around. Each day was an aliyah, was an ascent in some incredible area of spirituality. So by the time that they stood at Mount Sinai, they had externalized the Satan. It was the Satan's power over the human body is called Zoyama, pollution. They had extracted the Zoyama from their body, and they were no more subject to death. The Gemara says they were like Adam Rishon before the sin. Now that means they were not normal. They were not the human beings as we know it. Now we don't know what that means, and without getting into all the other questions and so on, that preparation was necessary for them to receive the Torah, which would have been the Torah of the Mashiach. You see. Now, so therefore, that's a very important concept. There needs to be a real preparation for this entire interchange, because this is really what the Messianic is about. It's not freedom, like I say, you know, where you make a great living and so on. You got a lot of customers and all that. That's not what it's about. It is a change in reality. It's really what it is. Anyway, now, the second important idea to understand when we understand this is that there are phases. Okay, and the phases are what? You have the first phase is what's called the Tikkun phase, where mankind is given the job to rectify the universe, which means to bring God's presence back into the world. And I've spoken about this, but I'm not going to dwell on this, but that's basically, it's called the Tikkun phase. Mankind tried for 2,000 years, they failed, so God gave the Tikkun, rectification ability, to the Jewish people, to Avraham Avinu and his descendants. So that's the second phase of the Tikkun process, which we are now in now. So that process continues for the next almost 4,000 years. Now we are at the end of time. So we are in the last phase of the whole Tikkun process, rectification process. And what that means is that we are in what's called the termination phase. You know, if you go see a play, you know, a play usually has 2 acts or maybe 3 acts, and it has different scenes in those acts. We are now the equivalent of Act 3, Scene 3, which is the end. That means the play is no longer interested in developing the plot. It now wants to bring the play to an end, the climax, right? We are in the climax phase, and that is why you are seeing what you are seeing. Unbelievable historic events, political events, and all kinds of events and so on, with such accelerated speed. We're in the termination phase. Now the termination phase itself has 3 subphases. The first subphase of the termination phase, remember, termination phase is Act 3, Scene 3. When God is no longer involved in terms of bringing the Tikkun. The Tikkun is 98% complete. The interest of God is to terminate the whole thing, which means he has to get the world ready for the Mashiach to come. That's what the Scene 3 is. Okay, so that has 3 subphases. The first one is called Ikvus de Mashiach, the steps foot of the Messiah. And what that is that the Mashiach is so close that you're so close to him that you can see his footsteps. The imprint of his footsteps has not diminished. You see, we are now at the end of the Ikvus de Mashiach. The Ikvus de Mashiach basically has started, without justifying it, 1840. Yeah, 1840, without getting into why and so on. We are now in 2020, right? And we are approaching the end of the Ikvus de Mashiach. That's an important idea. The next phase or sub-phase is called Aschalta de Geula, the beginning of redemption. Okay? And that primarily, okay, is the era of Mashiach ben Yosef. And then the third phase is called the Geula itself, Yemos HaMashiach, the Messianic era. So there you are. You have the Ikvus de Mashiach, you have the Aschalta de Geula, the beginning of redemption, and then you have the Yemos HaMashiach, which is the Messianic era itself. And all of that will proceed until the year 6000 on the Jewish calendar, right? This, because the world will last 6,000 years, and it will end in the English year 2240. That's when it ends. That means the entire world, and really in many ways, the entire universe is over. And then the universe changes into a spiritual place. But I'm not going to get into that and so on. And then after a while, it's a couple of thousand years, it becomes Olam Haba, which is the future world, and that is eternal. But the main thing is that what we need is the Mashiach. Forget about the rest of the transformations and so on. So we have now divided termination phase, and we have an understanding basically of what that is. We are located where? At the end of Ikvus de Mashiach. Now, in order for that to happen, which means what happens at the Ikvus de Mashiach, there are several requirements that has to happen. Okay. One of them, and that's how you can understand, is that since the Tikkun is almost complete, the Jewish people must get Eretz Yisrael back. That's one of the things that have to happen. Okay? The second thing, which I'm going to talk about these things, and each of these things I mentioned is going on now. That's why it'll give you a framework to understand. The second thing is the Erev Rav. The Jews that are not interested in Judaism, really, they believe that the uniqueness of Judaism is not the bond that the Jews have with God, which is the Torah. Their belief about Judaism is that Judaism is unique as a regular civilization. You know, sure, the Torah is great, but so is Shakespeare. You see, so therefore they focus on the culture of the Jewish people and the contributions of the Jewish people, like any other nation. That's why when you go to many of the museums and all that, they all look like American stuff, because they're all trying to imitate America, because these things, which are basically built in many ways by the Erev Rav, Jews who believe this, they imitate America. They imitate Western civilization, you see. That's their focus. So therefore, they must be terminated, the Erev Rav. And they are one of the greatest impediments to the Messianic approach. And all three, these things have to happen. Now, in terms of Israel, Israel itself has to go through certain phases itself. So one phase is that Israel must become a land of security, or else nobody's going to come back to Israel. Many Jews will not come to Israel because Israel is, in many cases, obviously in a tremendous state of war. Even though Israel dominates, doesn't make a difference. It's a state of war, and many people will not come. Second thing which has to happen to Israel is prosperity. Israel has to become an incredibly prosperous place. That means the cost of living has to go down. You got to get rid of the bureaucracy, the regulations. You got to get rid of a lot of things. You got to make Israel a user-friendly country. You know, where anybody can come to Israel, any Jew can come to Israel and really make it in a very good way, you know, and like they used to say, if you want to make a big fortune in Israel, you got to come with if you want to make a small fortune, you got to come with a big fortune, right? That has to change, or else Jews will not move to Israel, you know, and so on, you know. So these are the things that have to transpire as a hachana, as a preparation for an entry of Mashiach, you see, and therefore God has to be doing this kind of stuff. Very important idea to understand what are the prerequisites of things that must occur. And in many ways, that is what's happening so far. And I will explain that and so on, you know. So we can begin to focus on these 6 items that I mentioned. Now, one of the items is that something has to happen in terms of spirituality, and that is unknown how God will do that. That is going to be one of the greatest of all miracles, how God will bring his people back naturally, which is interesting, not miraculously, because everything you're seeing now is happening naturally, not miraculously, but that's for the an upcoming future and so on. Now, as I mentioned, Israel has to get, the Jewish people have to get their land back. It's interesting, and it started. It started in 1898 with Herzl, without getting into that, and so on. So all of a sudden, Israel found themselves back in their land after 2,000 years of exile. Now, it was quite natural, but it's a miracle. Because first of all, Herzl was okay with Uganda as the just imagine if we were in Uganda with all those locusts running around, right? But in any case, that's what he wanted, ultimately speaking. And of course, he changed his mind or whatever. And of course, he obviously got the land of Israel, which of course, that was the whole thing it was all about, and so on, But at the end of time, in Ikvus the Mashiach, there's a very unusual event that occurred, and that's very important. And that is that, as I mentioned with a lot of the different lectures and so on, the concept of Esav, the brother of Yaakov. Esav, the brother of Yaakov, is an Ov, a patriarch. In fact, I mentioned before that Esav, the brother of Yaakov, is greater than Yaakov Avinu. That's what we see. Because the gematria of Yaakov is twice, the gematria of Esav is twice Yaakov, with the Vav, and so on. So there's one of the Rishonim that says, had Esav done his job as a patriarch, he would have been twice as great as Yaakov Avinu. Very important idea. But in any case, Esav wanted to do tshuva at the end, and his tshuva was a very interesting word. He said, Yehi lecha shalach, let that which is yours be yours. You see, he says that at the end of Vayishlach. And Rashi says, what do you mean that, let that which is yours be yours? Esav is saying this to Yaakov. Here he's coming to kill him with 400 guys. He winds up telling them, let that which is yours be yours, which is incredible. And what that meant is Esav was saying that all the blessings and everything that you took, it's yours to keep. I realize they belong to you and not to me. And therefore Esav was at the point of doing tshuva, but he didn't do it because Yaakov, for whatever reason, misread the signs, and therefore he didn't, in many ways, had he given him Dinah, his daughter, then Esav would have done tshuva. So therefore, and I mentioned this, that God says to Esav, because you want to do tshuva 4,000, 3,000, whatever, 4,000 years ago, in the end of time, you will come back, do tshuva, and you and Yaakov will restore your relationship, which means you will be a brother to Yaakov. It's an incredible thing. And and therefore, you see that in many ways and so on, But in any case, so Esav does tshuva to assist Yaakov. And the pasuk for that is, of course, Rav Ya'avoy Tzo'ir, that the older will serve the younger. And that is really the perfect relationship between Esav and Yaakov. Okay, what is the historical event of that? Obviously, did Esav come back? Yes. Did he do tshuva? Yes. Who is Esav? Trump. Now just come right out with that. Donald Trump is a Gilgal, not of Esav, but of Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, who was the emperor of Rome. Marcus Aurelius was a very interesting guy. He wrote a whole book on philosophy. It's called The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. A very bright guy. But in any case, he had an unbelievable relationship with Rabbeinu HaKodesh, Rabbi, the one who wrote the Mishnah, you see. Because what happened was that they had a tremendous relationship between him and Rabbeinu HaKodesh, and the Gemara talks about it in Avodah Zarah with just incredible terms, the way it describes the relationship. Because Marcus Aurelius lived in Tveria for a certain while as Roman emperor, and Rebbe lived in Tveria. So somehow they met, and they had this incredible bond. In fact, Marcus Aurelius, a very interesting individual, is responsible for the Torah of Klal Yisrael. The problem was in 180 CE, at that point, Jews were becoming exiled. So Rabbi realized that the Jews needed to have a standard text. There was no real standard text. Each individual had their own notes about what they learned from their own rabbi. So therefore, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi, had to call a convention of all the Tanoim, those people who were involved in the mission and so on, to bring them together in a convention and come up with a standardized text called the Mishnah. Now he couldn't do that if the Jews were being persecuted and in a state of war. What Marcus Aurelius did, since he was the Roman emperor, what he did is he allowed the Jews a tremendous peaceful reign. So Rabbi was able to call everybody, all the Tanoim together, and write the Mishnah, you see? And that's Marcus Aurelius' contribution. Can you imagine that we have the Torah, our Mishnah, because of the input of Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, a Roman emperor. And we know that Esav is Rome, as we know, right? Esav is Edom, Edom is Rome, Rome is Christianity, Christianity is Western civilization. Western civilization is Rome, is Esav, you see? So it's an astounding that a descendant of Esav, Marcus Aurelius, is responsible for the Jews' Mishnayos. You have any idea what kind of reward that is? It is beyond belief what that is. And of course, because he's Esav, you see, but I'm not going to go into the whole thing and so on. So therefore, Trump is a modern day Esav. He's a Roman emperor. In fact, the President of the United States is a Roman emperor. That's really what it is. In fact, he's more powerful than a Roman emperor, and so on, But in any case, and what is the essential feature of Trump? What is it he does? What he does in terms of the Jews is, let that which is yours be yours. You see? Makes sense. That's exactly what he does. And he does it even against interest, which he shouldn't do. Because he wants to make peace with the Arabs, right? Instead, what is he doing? He's giving pieces of land to Israel, even though he doesn't even have a peace proposal, and he expects the Arabs to want peace. It's contrary to American interest, what he's doing. Yet he's doing it anyway, right? He makes the Jerusalem the capital, which is a slap in the face to all the Arabs. Then he moves the embassy. Now, obviously, if the Jerusalem is the capital, then Israel is a nation. You don't have a capital without a nation, right? So he's really saying Israel is yours. Then he says the Golan, right? Then he comes out with a statement that Israel does not violate any international law by the Shtachim, Judea and Samaria. But you have to understand what this is. He is slow, and then he comes out with this peace plan, which I will mention in a minute, which is an unbelievable statement that let that which is yours be yours. You see, he is following the biblical directive. It's amazing when you think about that. And the question is why? Because that's the Ikvus of the Mashiach. That Esav comes back in the end. At this time, right before Mashiach comes and begins to give Israel back all their territory. You see? And he actually said, you can annex everything. You right? Okay, so he put it on hold. But he obviously is giving Israel back the entire land of Israel, which is amazing. Now this is not by accident. This is divine. You see, because that's what his job is, and we are really at the end of time in that sense. You see, which is really, when you think about it, incredible. Now, therefore, the conclusion of this is that Esav, also known as Marcus Aurelius, also known as Donald Trump, right? Donald J. Trump, yeah. And so on. In fact, when you look at Trump, he looks like he's red complexion, got red hair, red ties. It's just astounding how close he is. And so he's got the characteristics of Esav, defiant, really tremendously defiant. He loves pleasure. I mean, I don't want to get into the whole psychological profile of this guy. But in many ways, he is Esav. But he's Esav in love with the Jews. Literally, that's really what it is. I am telling you. He has an unbelievable affection for the Jewish people. And of course, God arranged that. In fact, you know what once happened, you know? He once went over to Ivanka, who was Jewish, right? She became Jewish, you know? And he said to her, you know, I think I'm going to become Jewish. So she said, no. Dad, no way. No way. So he said to Ivanka, well, what's the problem? Why can't I become Jewish? So she told him, what do you mean? If you become Jewish, who am I going to sell my chametz to? Can't become Jewish, right? Anyway, so that now you begin to understand. He's Esav Yehiluch Shaloch, that which is yours be yours, and he's doing it, which nobody expected. Just uncanny. It's just beyond idea. Now, if he's a messianic figure, which he is, you know. In fact, maybe you know the gematria. The gematria of Donald Trump, right, is gematria exactly 424, Mashiach ben David. Not that he's Mashiach ben David, but he's clearly in the parsha of assisting the messianic process to move forward. And he does not know this, unless he decides to listen to this video, you know. But he does not understand. He doesn't realize who he is, you know. There are people that feel that he has messianic, what do you call it, messianic mission and so on, you know. But to my mind, nobody understands the biblical source of this. You know, you can see, many people say that somebody's a messianic mission and so on. But this is, you can see from the Torah what is going on. And therefore, at the end of time, that's exactly what goes on. That Esav has to come back to the Jewish people. You know, in any case. Now, but if he's a messianic figure, this is bad news for who? For the Sultan. Because the Sultan does not want him, right, to give Eretz Yisrael back to the Jews, because that is a messianic process. So therefore, the reason why we are witnessing unbelievable opposition is because the Sultan is dying. That's why. And the Sultan does not want Trump to survive, for obvious reasons, because Trump is moving the process forward, and the Sultan, of course, cannot have that. And therefore, what does the Sultan do? Right? Now, what's important also to remember is that Esav used to be, or still is in a certain sense, the major soldier of the Sultan. We know that from the Torah, where it says that Yaakov fought the Malach, and who's the Malach? He was the Sarah Shel Esav, the angelic being that was the angel of Esav. Who's that? The Sultan. Sultan himself is the Malach of Esav. You see. So Esav, for all these years, was his agent. You know, the last thing the Sultan wants is that this agent should now do tshuva and help the Jewish people. Of course not. So the Sultan has called. So that's why you're witnessing an enormous opposition, because it is satanic. So you're witnessing America having an unbelievable opposition, many people, right, against Trump, a gut hatred. You see, and the idea to that, why there's such a gut hatred, okay, is because the Sultan is doing whatever he can to put in the minds of people to destroy Trump, because Trump is furthering the messianic process. You see, so what you're witnessing is an incredible event. You are witnessing the Tov Sheb'Esav, which is Trump, warring with the Ra Sheb'Esav, the evil part of Esav. Because Esav still retains, there's a part of Esav that is still evil, which is part of the satanic mission and so on, you know. So therefore, it's a civil war. That's really what you're witnessing in America. You're witnessing a political civil war between the bad part of Esav, that wants to retain its characteristics, and the good part of Esav, which is Trump. And that's literally what's happening. However, what the Sultan does is he's calling out his major generals. Who are the major generals of the Sultan? The answer is the Erev Rav. Now, remember one thing, an Erev Rav is a person that does not believe in the Bon, the Torah, in that sense. And they're not interested in it. They don't believe that it makes the Jews unique. You see, that's the Erev Rav. But the Erev Rav are not Jews. there are the leaders of the Jews. A Jew who believes that is an Amoritz. He's one of the people that, unfortunately, forgot who he was, his uniqueness, and so on. The Erev Rav are leaders of the Jewish people, that want to destroy the Torah bond between the Jews and God. So we know that the Erev Rav, and they were responsible for the golden calf, for the Egel Hazov, the golden calf. So the Sultan has called out the Erev Rav to destroy Trump, because that's his main guys. Who are they? Those are the Jews who try to destroy Trump. That's why they're all Jews. You look at it, you can't believe what's going on. Like a cabal of Jews. Who do you got? You have this guy Adam Schiff, he's Jewish. You have Jerry Nadler, he's Jewish. Chuck Schumer, he's Jewish, right? And then you have, there's Bernie Sanders. Sanders is Jewish also. He's also Erev Rav. He's a communist. But he's Erev Rav. He hates the fact that he's Jewish. He's trying to escape that for years and so on, And then you have, of course, one of the greatest of the Erev Rav is George Soros, right? George Soros. He's the bankroll, right? They're all Jews. And these are the guys trying to destroy Trump. So the question is, why all the Jews trying to destroy the guy? Because they are all Erev Rav. And the Erev Rav are the main soldiers of the Sultan. You see, they're the guys dominating everything, and so on. And it's not just in America, it's also in Israel, which I will talk about. But anyway, that's why you have all these guys of Jewish people. One wonders, maybe Nancy Pelosi is also Jewish. Like, how did she get mixed up with this crowd? And so on, But in any case, the main idea is that's why you have so many Jewish people trying to destroy Trump. It's very interesting. And it's not a coincidence, because that's really, in many ways, what is going on and so on, Now, so you have this fight between the Erev Rav and the Ra Shebe'esav, the evil part of Esav, against Trump, which is the Tov Shebe'esav, the good part of Esav. But fortunately, God is on the side, obviously, of Trump, because he beat them, and they were tremendously, in many ways, discredited and destroyed and so on. So this is the concept of what's going on in terms of the impeachment. They try to remove this guy. They've been trying to remove this guy not because of anything he did. They want to remove him because of who he is. Because they've been talking about removing him since he got elected. In fact, before the election, they've been talking about impeaching this guy before he did anything. Like, it's like Trump could say to them, at least let me do something bad. You guys want to get rid of me. I didn't do anything yet. Like Trump says, they decided to get rid of me, right, when I came down that elevator and announced I'm running for the president. What does that show you? It's not what he does, it's who he is. But the question is, what do you mean who he is? What's so dangerous about who he is? And the answer is, he's a Messianic figure. Now, they don't know that consciously, of course not, but they know it spiritually. That's the Sultan telling him, you must destroy this guy, you see. Now, look, there are reasons why you could say, other than the spiritual reason, the reason why they hate Trump, and this is really the real reason, is because he's an existential threat to the Democrats. That's really what he is. Because they know in him, or intuitively, that he will defy them and he will take them away from all their tremendous positions. Because they have been running the United States for years. And a guy comes in who's an independent, and when a guy says, I'm going to clean up the swamp, they know that he means them, But that's Teva. But deep down, the real concept is that it is a spiritual mission, that they need to destroy him. Why? Because he is helping the Jewish people. He's Yehilu HaShalach. He's giving everything back to the Jews. You see, without any real coaxing. Who's forcing him? And it's against U.S. interests, you see. And that's what's happening. Now, at the same time, which is interesting, the Democrats trying to destroy him, of course, they fail, and they don't realize themselves how bad they look. Because people recognize, what they're doing is psychotic. You have no charges against this guy. What do you want from the guy? And they're still looking to impeach him and so on, So hopefully that what God is planning is this, is he's going to destroy the Democratic Party. What does that mean? By giving... Why is that? Because it's not only that the Democratic Party is against Trump, you see, but because they have destroyed America. All the immorality that you see, the liberalism, the immorality, unethical, this whole business of LGBT, whatever they call themselves, all of this is because of the Democratic Party. And not only that, all the infanticide, right? Killing kids, right? And then they vote, that you can kill a kid even when it's born already. Within the first couple of hours, you can still kill the kid. What's blatant murder? It's evil. I wouldn't even hallow it by saying sick. It's evil. We're looking at a terrible, terrible evil and so on, So what seems to be happening is God is saying, listen, I'm going to destroy you. How? Because I'm going to make your actions so obvious that nobody's going to vote for you. You see? So hopefully what that means is that Trump will then have not only the Senate, a greater majority, but he will take over the House, and then Trump will be unleashed. To do what? He will be unleashed to do what? To give back everything to the Jews, which we'll see, right? The whole Eretz Israel, right? He will protect the Jews from their enemies. The EU, right? The UN, all those nations that hate the Jewish people, Trump has been protecting them. Think about that. Nikki Haley defied the UN, right? He defies everything. You see, Trump and so on. He's an unbelievable shield against the enmity of the nations of the world against the Jews. He's unbelievable. It's like a big brother. In fact, that's really what he is. Asa was the big brother of Yaakov. And that's exactly what it is. There's a very interesting incident with the Rabbi of Poway. Remember, they killed a whole bunch of people in San Diego synagogue, Chabad house, remember? So he invited, I think his name is Goldstein, he invited him to speak in the White House. And he spoke. And then somebody told me this, that after the speech, he went over to Goldstein and said, I feel just like a brother to you. I said, wow. It's like they say, he prophesied and he didn't even realize he prophesied. 'Cause that's really what he is in his primus. Of course, he's a goy, but that's what Esav is, and so on. But that's really what he is. Because what he is doing for the Jews is abnormal. Never happened before. It's historical. And the incredible thing is he does it without any prompting. He just does it. Really? Because he loves the Jews. It's really astounding to watch this person, you see, But in any case, that seems to be happening. Now, out of nowhere, since he thinks he's the art of the deal, he's the great negotiator, right? He comes out with this peace plan. Let's think about this for a minute. What is the essential concept of the peace plan? Okay, what we have to remember is what the peace plan really is, and this is why in many ways, it'll never happen. That peace plan will never happen. But what it did do is very important. It changed the underlying principle of Oslo. Because the underlying principle of Oslo is that, the Arabs have a chelek in Eretz Israel, which is terrible that Israel agreed to that you have a legitimate claim to the land, which was terrible. And that's really what Oslo did. But what Oslo also did, and this was the underlying principle that the Americans always understood, and that is that the burden of proof of peace is on the Israelis, right? The Arabs want peace, right? Of course they want peace, right? Ignore the fact that they're killing everybody, right? It's the Jews. You got to prove you want peace. So the Jews always have to prove it by giving up land for peace, right? And all of the insane ideas, you see. So the Jews have to keep bending over backwards again and again. Meanwhile, they're getting killed left and right, and nobody cares about what either Arafat is doing or Abbas or Islamic Jihad or Hamas. We don't care. It's the Jews that have to prove that they want peace. Of course, that's classic anti-Semitism. That's what fuels it, especially with Obama and so on, So along comes Trump and says, that's over with. Right now, the Jews have to prove anything. You guys, the Arabs, have to prove that you want peace. That means he changed the game. He changed the entire framework of the Arab, which is a very great thing. That's number one. The second thing he did is that this can go on forever. So he gave him a deadline, 4 years. Right? It's very important. In other words, either you pony up, as they say, either you join and we'll give you an Arab state, a two-state, right? Or forget it. I'm going to allow Israel to annex basically everything. What we realize is the peace plan is nothing more than a device that God is using for Esav to give back the whole land of Israel to the Jews. That's really all it is. Now, is what's his name, Abbas, gonna accede, agree to this? Well, let's see. Here's what he has to do, right? One, he has to denounce terror. Number one. Number two, he has to denounce the payment to the terrorists, which he said he's never going to do. That's number two. Number three, he has to stop praising them and naming streets and squares after these guys. That's number three, right? Then number four, right? Not only that, but he also has to stop the textbooks, the educational system that the Jews, Shahid and all that kind of stuff. He's got to do that too. Then number five, right? He's got to give up the right of return. Yeah. Number six, he has to act like a normal state. You see, right? He's going to do any of this. And then there's number seven. He has to declare Israel as a Jewish state. And he cannot do that because it is theologically impossible. The real thing that stops peace in the Middle East is not the Arabs. It's the Quran. Because according to the Quran, the Arabs, Muslim, Islam, cannot give up any lands, right, that once belonged to the Arabs. That's why. So it is the Quran that is the obstacle. And they're not going to give up the Quran, they're going to throw it away. So therefore, peace is impossible based on the theology of the Quran. That's why it can never happen, you see. And besides that, it's like Arafat said, if I ever give them back, what they want, he said he'll be assassinated the next day. Abbas would be assassinated, you see. There are all other kinds of problems. So obviously, this can never be. It will never be, you see. In the end, the question is, what's the point of all this? And the answer is, this is a device that God can allow, it's politically correct, so to speak. It's a device whereby the Arabs, where Trump can give back everything to Israel, to annex the whole place. A very important idea. But what is the reality to all this? And in a certain sense, it's unfortunate. What is the reality of all this? I will give you a mashal, an example. Imagine, right? You live in a house, right? Some guy comes to the house, your house, knocks on the door. You open up the house, right? And you say, yes, what can I do for you? So the guy says, well, first thing you can do for me is get out of the house. It's mine. You are occupying my house. That's what the guy says, And then you and him get into a fight. A fight means screaming at each other. He's saying, get out of my house. It's my house. You're occupying my house. And you who live in the house is saying, what, are you crazy? What do you mean it's your house? It's my house. And you're screaming, right? And the guy says, well, he's saying it's his house. And you say, what are you talking about? It's my house, so please. And all of a sudden, there's a real ruckus, and it's 10 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden, the neighbors of the whole block, they hear this, and they come out, and they walk over, and they come, over and say, hey, there's so much noise going on here, So they say, what's going on here? So the guy, the owner is saying, so the guy who's claiming it's his house is saying, he's in my house. And the owner's saying, this guy's out of his mind, And so all of a sudden the neighbors say, well, wait a minute, look, this is ridiculous. You're screaming at the top of your guy's lungs, you're disturbing our sleep, you see. So do me a favor, give me a living room. Just give me a living room, that's all. Okay, so you keep part of the house, and this guy claiming that it's his house and you're occupying it, so give him your living room. You see? Right? Now what would you say to that compromise? It's insane. Well, I should give my living room because this nut job is claiming that his house without any proof whatsoever? You see? That's the exact mashal of what's happening. The Jews have biblical proof, How many times does it say in the Torah, the land of Israel is yours? In fact, it's the first Rashi in the Chumash, where Rashi says, right? Why did God start with Bereshis when he should have started with Achodesh Lochem, the first commandment? Because God says, in the end of time, the Goyim will come and say, it's our land, right? So what are you doing here? So God will say, and the Jews will say, God created the world, it's his land, he decided to give it to us and take it away from you. Finished, he's the owner. He can do whatever he wants. In other words, the first Rashi already talks about the legitimacy of the fact that the Jewish people own the land, right? It's the same idea. So the Jews have biblical proof. That's the first thing. The second thing is they have historical proof. History knows that it was the Jews. Even the New Testament has Yeshu running around overturning the temple tables, which he, and so on, Of course, it's all Kohanim. Even the New Testament says that Jerusalem, Israel, belongs to the Jews. It's the Jewish temple and so on, But historically, everybody knows everything you find, all the coins, the whole archaeology is all about Jewish possession of Eretz Yisrael. They all know this, you see? So then how can these people claim? So the Jews have biblical proof, they have historical proof, they have legal proof. Why? Because the League of Nations said, and that was affirmed by Balfour, and there was a conference in San Remo in Italy in 1923 that Israel belongs to the Jews, and that was legal. They made it legal, you see? So Israel legally owns the land of Israel. In fact, Israel really owns Jordan, except the British, who is responsible, you should know, for the Arab problem. They decided to take away Jordan and give it to the Arabs because they wanted the oil of Abdullah, and they gave Israel this small, narrow part of which Israel has. In many ways, Britain is responsible, because not only did Britain take away Israel from the Jews and gave 4/5 to Jordan, which is illegal, because the League of Nations mandate is recognized by the UN as legal. So that's number one. Number two, because Britain wanted the oil of the Arabs, so what the British did is they wrote the white paper, 1938, which meant that Jews running away from Hitler, Makshmoy, couldn't go to Israel. The story of the Exodus and so on, And not only that, but they allowed any immigration of Arabs into Israel without any problem. They didn't even look, you see? So everybody, all the Arabs from Syria used to come to Israel. Why? Because the economy in Israel was much greater than in Syria and the other Arab lands. That's why there's so many Arabs here. They were invited in by the British. So the one who caused this mess is England, Britain, you see. And God therefore took it out on them. He punished them because they used to be the world empire, and now they're a bunch of has-beens, basically, What are they? A little island in the middle of the Atlantic and so on and so forth. That's the an einish for what they did. I'm not going to go more into that, but that's the problem started with the British. So therefore, Israel has biblical proof, historical proof, and legal proof, and so on. Yet the world says, come on, give them something. Give them half your country. Excuse me. Could you imagine how much land the Arabs have? You mean you cannot take 1 million or whatever and put them in the Jordan, which was originally, that's really what was supposed to be the Palestinians, is Jordan? Do you know how much land the Arabs have? So you got to take a little country called Israel that's barely the size of New Jersey, and you want to carve it up and give Arabs half of it? It's insane. Why? Because you don't like the fact that we're arguing and that's going to jeopardize your oil supply. You see the embargoes and so on. Is this a reason to take away Israel from the Jewish people? You should know the world has committed, and that's really what they are doing. They are committing a grievous sin because they know that what they are doing is illegal. That's really what it is. But in any case, that's what's happening. You have Ikvus the Mashiach, where God is now restoring the land of Israel through Trump back to the Jewish people. Very important idea. So that's why Trump came out with the peace plan. That's why there's an impeachment, you see, and that's why the Democrats are behaving literally in a psychotic manner. That's what explains this, you see, because remember, it's the Ikvus of the Mashiach. Now, let's take a look at some other things going around the world. Brexit, right? What's the concept of Brexit? Now, I want to tell you something. There are three theaters which is very important to understand. One is America, and I just explained America, the impeachment, the Democrats, and the peace plan, and so on, you know. The second theater is Israel, which I will talk about, and the third theater to consider is the rest of the world. Now, Brexit. What's the story with Brexit? You know, it looks like, okay, you know, they decided to break away from the EU, no problem. But let me tell you something. The EU is terribly anti-Semitic. We know that. Terribly anti-Semitic. Now, what God is going to do also is, as we get closer to the Messianic era, God is going to perform what's called a tahara, a purification. He's going to begin to remove the evil of the world. You see, even before the Mashiach comes. It's a very important idea. In other words, retribution and purification begins to happen now, you see. So, if England leaves the EU, do you realize that's probably the end of the EU? Because there are many countries in the EU that want out. And the three major nations of the EU, European Union, is what? Is England, France, Germany. And England just left. That's like a mortal blow to the strength of the EU. So what we're witnessing is something interesting, is that this could be, in many ways, the beginning of the end of the EU. And that is the punishment of the EU. You want to be anti-Semitic? I will dissolve your entire union. And England leaving is the beginning of a dissolution of the EU. You see, because many other nations also want out, because it's a disadvantage to belong as one. You see, so that's another thing happening. Then, of course, another thing happening. Remember, this is what's called the tahara, the purification or the removal of evil. Slowly, how God is slowly unraveling different nations. Well, the next one is who? Is Iran. And Iran is being dissolved. Iran is slowly being terminated. Right? We know that. Especially if the Trump, our lost brother, killed Soleimani. You know, you have no idea what a blow that is. I don't know if there's a comparison in America to Soleimani's position in Iran. He was the boss. He and Khomeini were tied at the hip, as they say, you know, and he killed Soleimani. In fact, Khomeini cried at the funeral of Soleimani. Could you imagine? Because he was his main guy. He was like his hands that did everything. And Trump, without batting an eyelash, just took him out and finished. You're witnessing a dissolution of evil. And I'm not even going into the fact that Iran itself economically is dissolving, because Trump is killing them economically. You know, they used to sell, their exports were 90% oil, now it's down to 10%. You have no idea how much money they do not have because of what Trump did. And they're dissolving slowly. You know, so ultimately they're going to do something desperate because they're really dying, you know. And so that's a second tahara, you see. Then he also took out Abu Bakr from ISIS. You know, and ISIS is a major force of evil, you know, and Trump took him out also. And what a credit that he took out the two greatest terrorists on the planet, you see. Here. Now, then we come to China. There are two countries in the world that create an enormous instability in the world. Two of them, you know. One is Iran, and they are dying. The second is China. We don't realize the evil of China. We don't realize that because we don't live in China, you know. Communism is a terrible dictatorship on China. But besides that, China in many ways is gazlonim. They steal an enormous amount of, there's an enormous amount of cyber theft. You can't believe how many trade secrets these guys have stolen. And you know, 3 years ago, they broke in the Chinese. In fact, they just indicted four of them. They broke into Equifax, you know, the credit card bureau, and they stole 150 million identities, which means their name, social security, and birthday. And that is an identity theft of unparalleled proportion. That was Chinese. Now, how do you do something like that? You know what kind of gazela that is? And I'm not even talking about the trade secrets that they force companies to reveal if you want to do business in China. And then the tariffs. They are incredible gazlanim. That's what they are. And we know gazela is one of the reasons why God destroyed the world, right? The waters of Noach and so on, you know. And I'm not even going into the fact that how many Chinese used to kill their kids because there was a ban, you can't have more than one kid, whatever. They used to kill their, the girls, the boys, whatever. Enormous amount of ritzicha. What was that?
They kill the girls.
Kill the girls, yeah. That's one way of solving a problem, right?
It's created other problems.
Yes, of course, you know. That's ritzicha, that's murder, you see. So we don't realize the evil of this country. Besides, China is aggressive. They're trying to take over the whole Asia Pacific, you know, and so on, you know. They are an evil force, you see. And God, since we are now in the Ikvus of the Mashiach, which is a process of Tahara, this is the beginning of what God is trying to clean up the planet before the Mashiach comes. China is suffering with a virus that can destroy it, really destroy it. It's amazing that something as big as a nanometer, a little coronavirus, right, can destroy a country of 1.4 billion people. You see, but that's what you're looking at. You are looking at a tahara of the world in order to prepare the entry of Mashiach, where there's much less evil in the world. And what may happen, something very interesting. China is responsible, these guys at the top, the Communist Party, of the coronavirus outbreak, because they knew about it, and we know in December. In fact, they took the guy who revealed it, he was the whistleblower, he ultimately died from the disease, right? And they put him in jail. They told him, you can't do this, you know? So had they acted then, there would be no outbreak, there would be no plague. We are witnessing a plague of unbelievable proportions. Right now, there are 70,000 people that are infected. Imagine, what do you do with 70,000 people? You can't there's no 70,000 beds, you see? And what they're doing is dragging them to centers where they put them in there, whether you have it or not. What's going on is just incredible, you know? And I heard that they're cremating 300 bodies a day. You know, that means, and believe me, it doesn't mean those who are, who are really dying. If you could be infected, they will kill you. It's very easy that they will kill you. They're going to wait around for you to get cured. You know, the fact that you have the disease, you can give it, they'll kill you. Chinese have no compunction against killing anybody. So we are watching an incredible dissolution of China, and it's very possible that the Chinese will rebel against the Communist Party and destroy them. That would be incredible, where Xi Jinping is going to go, you know, and the evil that these Communist Party commit to Chinese people will go, you see? And that could be really the basic reason for the whole coronavirus, but it certainly may destroy China economically. We don't even know they've closed all the factories. Can't believe that half the world's goods comes from China, and their factories are closed. You know, Apple closed its factory. We can't even imagine how much money is lost on a daily basis. You know, and they say 1,500 people have have died. I don't believe that. It's probably much more, because they always lie. You see, we are looking at what used to be the Black Plague. That's Jinping calling me. And he is saying, Hobrach Munis. Wow. Anyway, but that's what it is. God just doesn't destroy a country. You remember the Black Plague, the bubonic plague? I don't know if you remember it, you know, obviously it happened in 1348 or whatever, you know. Why did that happen? That killed more than half of Europe, the Black Plague, the bubonic plague. And by the way, the plague came from China. That was it went over China, over the Silk Route, and landed up in Europe. Why did God do that to Europe? You know why? Because of the Crusades. The Crusades killed, how many Jews did the Crusades kill? They destroyed pogroms, Jewish communities, So God says, you want to do this to my people? After 4 or 5 Crusades, I'll show you. And he wiped out half Europe. They don't come for nothing, They come when there's an enormous amount of evil, especially to the Jewish people. You look at the Spanish flu in 1918, I think it killed 70, 80 million people. Why? Because it came right after World War I. You know how many Jewish communities were destroyed after World War I? This is what happens, you see. So, especially now in Ikris the Mashiach, there's what's called a Tahara process. And that process is now going on, and it's going to take China and force them to kneel. And it can destroy them economically.
15% estimated mortality rate from the coronavirus.
15%.
Estimated right now.
That's a very high. Yeah. It's a major destroying force. And like I'm saying, there are 2 countries in the world that are responsible for the basic instability of the world. You see, Iran, which is dying, and now God is taking care of China. And what this may mean also is the end of the Communist Party, because they're going to take it out on these guys. All this we don't even know the economic disaster, because all the factories are closed. They're losing billions of dollars every day. Sure, imagine Apple, it's closed, and I heard that Hyundai, it just closed its plant. Also, it's unbelievable. And of course that's going to affect the economy of the world, but certainly China. So that's an understanding of China. It's a Tahara process. Before the Mashiach comes, the world has to be rid in many ways of the evil that goes on in the world, you see. So you have that. Now the Arab states have been destroyed. Many of them are failed states. You have Egypt, you have Libya, you have Yemen. These are all basket cases. You think about that, which means that God has destroyed Yishmael, which is amazing because he did it without Israel having in any way to go to war. Trump took out Iran, and Israel does nothing. They don't have to do anything. You have any idea what that is? Big Brother came along and took out Iran. You see, what a chesed that God does for the Jews. You don't even have to spend any money, you see. And that's basically what he did with these guys. So the Arab states are gone. Really, they're gone. The power of Yishmael, and especially what God did, which is very interesting, is that America is the greatest exporter of oil, an oil producer. So that's the end of the oil dominance of the Arab people, because America now produces all the oil. Israel now is going to be one of the greatest producers of gas, and with the Leviathan fields and so on, Was that out of nowhere? No, because what we see is the diminution of Yishmael. That's basically what you're really looking at in this sense, Especially we know that there's a tremendous drive to make electric cars, which won't even need oil. So the usage or the need for oil is severely diminishing. Now I heard recently that Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, their oil is being depleted. They're running out of oil. And in about 10 years, they will have run out of oil basically, which is incredible. Their economies are based on oil. 95% of the money that they make is oil, So you can imagine if Saudi Arabia has no oil anymore, then it's a nothing. It's a desert community, you see. And which is also very interesting. So that really is diminishing the power of Yishmael substantially. And what's 10 years? 15 years, it's nothing, you see. But it's also interesting is that these countries must change their economy or else they're finished. The handwriting is on the wall. So what that means is that they have to get close to Israel, because Israel can help them enormously in terms of economy, high tech, medicine. I mean, it's a no-brainer, you see. And I'm sure that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and so on are fuming against Abbas because they want to get close to Israel. So they have to toe the line, we're really Muslim and so on, because they don't want to be assassinated in their country. But really, they don't want this nonsense. The Arab situation, the Arabs and so on, the Palestinians and whatever, it's a non-entity now. Nobody cares. It's gone. People want to get on with their lives and move on, you see. So they certainly want to move on to Eretz Israel. So we see that's happening. So you take a look at what's going on around the world. Either it's all about Edom protecting the Jews against their enemies, and Edom or Trump giving the land back. Like I said, and the peace process is nothing more than the way to do it, you know. Or the second theater is the world itself, where enormous amount of evil countries are dissolving. Very important idea. It's all because the entry of Mashiach. Then the next country, of course, is Israel. Now the problem with Israel is the Erev Rav. You know, the Erev Rav is that, and like I say, you know, as long as Netanyahu is prime minister, the Jews will never do tshuva. It's that simple. Of course he will accommodate the Haredim. Fine. But that's only because he needs them as a coalition. And even now that's not helping him and so on, you know. But that a leader, God expects a leader of the Jewish people to promote Judaism. Not to stand aside and say, okay, I need you for a coalition, so therefore, you know, I'll do what you ask. Excuse me. You need to do it, not them, because you're the leader. You see, this is what God expects. If you are a leader of the Jewish people, that's why God had so many what's called complaints and tainus against the Jewish kings. Remember the old Jewish kings? You know, all of them, especially Manasseh and so on, they destroyed the Jews. Because God says, you're the king, the buck stops here, as Harry Truman used to say. You need to help, you need to promote religion, Judaism. You need to bring me back to the people. You need to bring Torah back to the Jews, not accommodate some other party for political reasons. So he's an Erev Rav. You know, he's not as bad as the other guys, you know, but he's an Erev Rav because he's completely negligent and derelict in his responsibility, as far as God is concerned, in bringing the Torah back to the Jews, because it's desperate. You know, there's I read an article. There's 1.5 million public school kids. I don't know if you know that. Public school, right? 1.5 million kids. Okay. They don't have much Jewish education, obviously. In fact, they gave out a test once to Israelis, and they said, we want to give you sentence completion. And what was the sentence completion? You know, we give part of a sentence, you got to fill out the rest. So the first part of the sentence was, Shema Yisrael. And they said, please complete the sentence. Hardly anybody could complete the sentence. You believe this? Shema Yisrael. Yeah. Yeah. It just shows you what goes on. So what they do is they have one or two courses, right? You know who's in charge of the courses in the public school system for 1.5 million kids? The Reformed movement. It's called the Hastings Institute. And they are teaching pluralism to these kids. Pluralism means that, well, there are many forms of Judaism. There's Reformed, there's Conservative, maybe Reconstructionist. There's also happen to be Orthodoxy. You see? But how do you do that? In fact, they introduced a course or some type of a program, right, that will tell the kids the rewards of keeping Shabbos. And guess what? They rejected it. Too much religion. It's incredible to read that article. You can't believe what you're reading. That means what you're looking at is 1.5 million children, which is the basis of Judaism. These are the next generation are going to be taught pluralism in terms of Judaism, which is worse than not teaching them anything at all. Because if they think that there are many forms of Judaism, they're going to say, oh, I heard about this, but go prove your aspect of religion is correct. You don't call this an Erev Rav? Do you have any idea what the achrayus, what the responsibility of Netanyahu is? And the incredible thing about this, and it's really terrible, but it's a public record, the one who signed off on this, on the reform movement's ability to control the education in the public school, is Naftali Bennett. Yeah. He was the education minister. He signed off on this, which is, but it's really terrible. Therefore, they must go. It's the greatest ikov, the greatest obstacle to the Messiah, to the Mashiach, is the Erev Rav. We don't realize how much of an obstacle they really are, you see. And before Mashiach comes, and I'm talking about a whole reversal of this, to bring the Jews back to the Torah, which God says is going to happen, because of the whole Messianic era, and that's why I started off this whole Shia with the real spirituality of a Messianic era. It's all about Ruchnius. It's not about anything else. Of course, there's a lot of great things that accompany it, you see. So therefore, they have to go. And what you are witnessing now in terms of the elections, isn't it strange? For the first time in history, right? They tried to put a coalition together twice, failed, right? And not only that, as I had spoken previously, not only that, but that's the first time in history that a sitting prime minister has been indicted. And he is now indicted. In fact, he retracted his immunity and immediately Mendel got him indicted. So you're looking at a person that failed twice. He's been indicted, which is unheard of. How in the world can he run for prime minister? It's unheard of. And I'm not even referring to his guilt or his innocence or what the crime is. But he will be so busy defending himself, he's got no time to be a prime minister. He's got 3 cases against him. Time-wise, it's absurd for a man that's indicted on 3 crimes, no matter what they are, to be able to run as a prime minister with so many decisions that have to be made on a daily basis. The Likud is insane. How do you do that? I'm not going into if he's guilty or innocent or the nature of the crimes. I'm not going into that. But he's got to defend himself, right? And how can he do that if he's running prime minister? You know what kind of decisions he's got to make on a daily basis? When all day he's going to be thinking, okay, I got to talk to my lawyers, I got to make court appearances. Of course not. Yet they won't give him up. Is it Netanyahu they won't give him up? Is it the Likud? No. It's the Satan. His main guy is the heir of Rav. He doesn't want them, just like he doesn't want Trump. So what you're looking at, impeachment in America, the equivalent of impeachment in America is really what? Is the inability of the heir of Rav to put together a government, you see. And for whatever reason, God is allowing this to continue, because their time is not yet up. But slowly it's dissolving. In fact, in 2 weeks, we will see what happens, you know. And the worst case scenario is Gantz. Gantz will destroy Judaism. Why? Not because he's an anti-Semite. No, he's not against Judaism. But Gantz is for everybody else. Everybody. Means you want to have buses on Shabbos? No problem. You do what you want. You want to convert in a non-halakha conversion? No problem. You can convert. You want to get married? No problem. Let the Reform rabbi marry you. You see, Gantz is what's called a kolboy. Everybody's okay. You see? But could you imagine if you have a city that has Chil Shabbos, where you can get married by anybody, you see, as long as they have the name Rabbi in front, right? Or you can convert, become Jewish by a Reform guy, right? And you have all of this. And not only that, what about kosher meat, treif meat, and so on? Chil Shabbos is rampant, right? Do you know that nobody will ever give this up? A guy who can go to a restaurant on Shabbos, go to a movie on Shabbos, do whatever he wants, right? He's not going to give it up, after with a new government. Once you get the cat out of the bag, forget it. You never get that guy, the cat back in. Once you've given the ability of people to drop all semblance of religion, they're not going to allow you to reverse it. Of course, it's human nature. So you have a guy like that, Gantz, he'll destroy Judaism. He is the worst of the heir of Rav, literally. You cannot do more damage than that guy if he gets in. You see, from a Torah perspective. I mean, he may be a nice guy. I don't know who he is. He may be a nice guy. You could talk to him, have a conversation with him. But that's totally irrelevant. I'm talking about spirituality. I'm talking about that the Jews need to have their Torah. And from that standpoint, he is what? He's toxic to Judaism. Now, Netanyahu is the same thing. Not because Netanyahu actually is more religious, whatever that means, in terms of himself, because he does believe in the Torah, I think. I don't know myself. But anyway, but the problem with Netanyahu is he's a leader, and it's his responsibility to bring Torah back to the Jews. That's his responsibility, and God is going to hold him up to that. He has no idea when he stands in judgment, what God is going to say. Now, it is true that he has done some very great things, no question about that. But when you think about that, if you ask God, well, what's the greatest thing I can do for you, right, to give you real joy? And the answer is, make people Jewish, religious, Torah. That's where it's at. It is not I who say this, right? It's Moshe Rabbeinu. Every fourth pasuk is where Moshe Rabbeinu says, and you will observe the commandments, isn't it? You ever see how many times Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ushmartem mitzvahs? Over and over and over again. Like he never stops. Like it's almost an obsession. You know? Why is he saying this all the time? Well, he says, and you will observe the commandments, the chukim and the mishpatim, and everything like that, because that's the key. That's what God wants. You see? But if you're a leader, you need to do this. So we are watching an incredible thing taking place. It looks like the Israeli government is dissolving. I mean, there is no government really, but it's dissolving. This is what's happening. You see, it's almost like God is saying, you know, you could do whatever you want. You know, you can have as many elections as you want, no problem. But you're not going to have a government. So it will be fascinating to see what happens in 2 weeks. You see, and I hear now that the election committee, you know what they're doing? They're already deciding that you have to have a fourth election. They already know the third election is finished. They actually have a date. A week before Rosh Hashanah is the date of the fourth election. Could you believe this? Because they expect there to be a fourth election. That means Israel will have been without a government basically for 2 years. Now what is interesting is the pressure. You ever have a government like Israel without a government for 2 years? Because even after an election, then everybody has to put a coalition together, right? And the whole fight, each guy has 28 days, whatever, right? I mean, it takes months, even after the election, to have a coalition, you see. So you're going to look at a government, Israel, that doesn't have a government for 2 years, and they're already dying because there's no budget. People need money. You see, the military needs money, the economy, it's incredible that there's no budget. Because there's no government, so they can't. It's a caretaker government, so therefore they can't. They cannot do anything in that sense. Which, when you think about it, is insane. And not only that, God has added a new pressure, and I hold that's the reason. What is that? That Jared Kushner said, you cannot annex unless there's a government. That's what he said. And everybody's dying to annex. So there's a new pressure. Wait a minute. You mean we're not going to have another government for 6 months more? You see, it's already February. We're not going to have a government till November, and they're all dying to annex. You see, because they all want that as a credit. You know, so that's a new pressure. So could you imagine? You think people are going to go vote a fourth time? It'd be insane. People say, "I'm sick and tired of this." You know, this is absurd. You know, it's an exercise in futility even to go to a ballot box. Because we know what's going to happen. There's going to be a fifth, and a sixth, and a seventh, right? You know? And then the topic of conversation with everybody is going to be, so when do you think the 80th election is going to take place? That's going to be the topic of conversation, right? And you want to know something? The governor of the Bank of Israel said that he estimates that the 3 elections cost 10 billion shekel. That means each election costs approximately over $1 billion. They don't have that money. In fact, they said they're going to raise taxes. So not only you won't have a government, no budget and so on, right? Everybody's going to have to pay more tax. Could you imagine how desperate people are going to be to have a government? So I'm hoping what will happen is that they'll realize something. The only way to break the stalemate, you know what that is? There's only one way to break the stalemate, or this will go on forever. You know? The only way to break the stalemate is you got to get rid of Netanyahu, because nobody wants him. Gantz will not sit with the guy. Liebman certainly will not sit with the guy. He's the Ikov. You know, the fact that he is running stops everybody from forming a coalition. So the real thing is he's got to wise up and say, listen, he's about to be, you know, he's going to have to be indicted and go to court and all that. He's taking a terrible chance. Why doesn't he get smart and say, listen, what do I need this for? He said, I've already been prime minister for more than 10 years. I've already broken the records, right? Let me retire. I'll retire, and guess what I'll do? I'll go around making speeches and make 250 grand a speech, like everybody else. And I will retire with my legacy, right? My legacy will be intact because he's going to make a deal with Rivlin. Rivlin already said, I'll pardon you. You see? Which is great. So he can retire with all the covet of what he's done. You know, right? One of the greatest prime ministers, right? His legacy will be intact. He'll make a fortune of money because he's considered a great statesman, right? And everybody's going to pay him 250 grand for a speech, right? And so on. What does he need this for? It's gaiva. It's arrogance. He can't give up. the prime ministership. It's arrogance. But wisdom would say, hey, get out while you're clean, because you've already been indicted. And if you get convicted, it's jail time. The conviction of this is 7 years for bribery and so on. Maybe he will wake up and say, what do I need this for? You know, especially if in this election he can't put together a coalition. Then what? Three attempts to put a coalition, and in each one he fails. You know how bad that looks? That destroys his image of invincibility. That's part of the problem. People think Netanyahu is invincible, and they're all afraid to vote against him because they think he'll survive and he'll come after me, right? He'll take away my ministership and all that. That's really why, because they're all afraid of him. It's fear because anybody with seichel would say this doesn't make any sense. You already failed to put together a coalition twice, and you're indicted. And now if he fails again the third time, what are we, crazy here? What do we need this guy for? You know, take your glory and move on, you know, into the annals of the great prime ministers of Israel and so on, you know. So I'm hoping that that's what will happen. And as a result of that, hopefully they're going to look around for somebody else, because Rivlin has the authority to do that. And hopefully they'll look at a guy, Gideon Sa'ar, and say, okay, look, you put a coalition together, and I think you can. And he will be the first prime minister in Israel that has been elected prime minister without one vote being cast. Now that would be what's called a Purim gift, because Purim is v'nahapechu. The essence of Purim is v'nahapechu. What is a v'nahapechu? Haman was incredible, the grand vizier, and within 3 days he was dead. He went to that party with Esther, thinking, "Wow, I'm the only one that Esther invited. Could you imagine who I am? That I'm a beloved by the king and queen." Right? 3 days later, he's hanging from the tree that he prepared for Mordechai. Right? What is that? Only God can pull that off. It's impossible. This can't happen normally, naturally. You know, that's v'nahapechu. Trump is a v'nahapechu. Right? When he came out of that elevator and said, "I'm running for president," right? Everybody said, "That's great, because you are going to provide the comic relief. You're going to be the comedy. You know, now we can all get a kick out of this." Everybody laughed. Him, president, and he beat them all. V'nahapechu. That's why God does something. And I once said there are 3 psukim that refer to God right by the Messianic era, because you see that by Yetzias Mitzrayim, again Egypt. You know, the first pasuk is right where it says Evan Mohasu Aboinim in Tiram, the rock, Evan Mohasu Aboinim, the rock that everybody despised, became the cornerstone. That's a miracle. The cornerstone, the stone that everybody despised, Evan Mohasu Aboinim, the builders despised, that became the cornerstone. It's the nest. The second pasuk, right, is where it says, Hisiyatzu uru'u, stand back and watch. It's Yeshua Hashem, the salvation of God, by the Kriyas Yamsuf. And God said, listen, don't worry, watch what I do. That means that's a v'nahapechu, and it was. Think about that. The Jews are with their backs at the sea. In front of them is the whole Egyptian army. I mean, read it as select, right? They're finished. They don't know how to fight. They've been slaves for 210 years. Not only that, what weapons do they really have? They were doomed. And God said to Moshe, right? Watch what I do. You see, and it says, Hashem yilochem yilochem, v'atem tachrishin. I will fight for you. And God all of a sudden just wiped them out. It was unbelievable. It's probably one of the greatest turn of events ever known, where the Egyptian armies, one of the greatest armies in the world, goes after, whatever the amount of people, a couple million Jews and so on. It was clearly was going to slaughter them, and so on, And not only did they fail to do that, but they all died in the Yam Suf. The truth is, when you think about that, it was insane. The Yam Suf split. Why would anybody go into a sea that is being held up by God? Right? It doesn't. God just wiped you out 10 makas, right? And you're going to go into the sea that He is holding you up. You see? Why would it got to be insane for that? But they had no free will. God made them go into the sea, and of course He drowned the whole Egyptian army. And then it's also the Medrash, He killed everybody else in Egypt that lived. It was a slaughterhouse, death to the Egyptians. That's what happens in the end, and we're witnessing that in terms of a tahara and so on, But this is a psukim. That's what happens in the end, you see. So it's very possible there's going to be a v'nahapechu on the Erev Rav, because the Erev Rav is the last klipa, as they say. It is the last force that is anti-Torah, and it is destroying the ability of the Jewish people to reunite with God and His Torah. And that's clear like that, you see. So hopefully this, in 2 weeks' time, we will see the end of the Erev Rav, and so on, And that is truly the beginning. That will be the end of the Ikvus de Mashiach. And then right after that begins the Aschalta de Gula. That's the beginning. When the Mashiach ben Yosef is released from his prison, okay, and he begins to become more and more spiritual, slowly, because the Jews cannot tolerate this individual doing his thing, too holy. So they therefore will increase in spirituality while he increases in spirituality, you see. It's a simultaneous growth. That's how God solves the problem. You see, if he would have come in his full battle unit, the full holiness, it would have been terrible. But since he emerges from prison, and they emerge, the Jewish people, from being slaughtered by the Erev Rav, and so on. Imagine 1.5 million kids being taught, that Reform Judaism is okay. It's unbelievable. That's an ibud, a destruction of the entire next generation. We cannot even believe what that means for the next generation of Jews. It's just beyond belief. In any case, and I think I don't know if I mentioned this, that they want to introduce a program of the rewards of keeping Shabbos, and they nixed it. I said that. Yeah, okay, and they nixed it because it's just too much religion. Anyway, but then we'll begin the Aschalta de Gula. So Mashiach ben Yosef will begin to grow, and it'll be miraculous. It'll be a v'nahapechu, and therefore the Gula itself will begin, which is astounding. And if you want to have some type of a timetable, all right, like wow, when, right? So there's Zohar, right? The Zohar says the following. It's in the Zohar Raya Mehemna, which is a section of the Zohar. It says that Tchis HaMesim, which begins after the Mashiach ben David, not ben Yosef, right? It says that it will take place after ben David comes, but it will take 210 years to fully wake up, resurrect all the Jews. Because every Jew will get up based on how sinful he was. The more sinful, the longer it takes to get up. In any case, it says 210 years. Now, we know that the world ends in the English year 2240, right? That's the end of the world, including the Messianic era. If you subtract 210 from 2240, what year is it? 2030. That's less than 10 years from now, isn't it? Yeah. That means, according to that Zohar, Mashiach ben David will be here by 2030. It's amazing, right? What does that mean? What has to happen before? What happens before, right? Israel has to get all the territory back, right? Everything. The Jews have to be reunited with their Torah, right? The whole world has to turn over. Iran has to be finished, and China has to be subdued, and Trump has to become tremendous, and so on, and all this. And Israel has to rise amongst the nation, which it is, in an stupendous way, which it is right now. You see, there's going to be a world change, literally, a world change in terms of the order of the world in less than 10 years. That is why you are seeing things with unbelievable acceleration. Like every day you wake up, there's something new, like Trump's tweet. Like, what did he tweet today? That's why every day you see new things. It's accelerated. What happens in 1 year today probably took 300 years in the olden days. In terms of it was much more stable, because we are rapidly rushing toward the end, and that basically seems to be what's happening. So let's hope, right? Let's hope that we are facing the end of time when all the evil will be subdued and destroyed, and there will be only a world of not only of honesty and decency, right? A world of tremendous goodness and health and charity and chesed and so on, but a world of unbelievable Torah and spirituality, but most of all a world in which the Jewish people will be reunited with God Himself. Thank you. Any questions? The only question, you can ask me anything you want, but do not ask me who the Mashiach is. That's the next year. Yeah, go ahead.
You know, you talked about China and how the whole the coronavirus, which they've renamed, called
yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Right. So, you know, you stated that it can destroy the Chinese economy.
Sure.
Most of the world
Yes.
is dependent
On China. Correct. Yeah.
Most products in the world are imported from China.
Yes, that's
So
true.
how is this going to?
Because it's a part of it's a punishment to the materialism of the world.
So this can destroy the world economy.
Well, it'll certainly set them back. Yeah, yeah. What you're looking at is a tahara. A tahara means a purification, or a clean. Let's say it's called a cleanup job. Once it's unleashed, what you're looking at now is what's called in Torah language, Idon Rischa, a time of severe boiling judgment. The world is now going through a period of tremendous judgment, which means against evil, you see. And that's why you're seeing the dissolution of many, many things. Democrats have lost Iran, China, the Arab Rav. And there's so many countries going through terrible times. You're looking at a tremendous time of judgment against evil, not against good, you see. And that is truly Messianic. It's a cleanup job. It's what it is. But you're right. But that will be against the world, because the world has become severely materialistic, pleasure-oriented, you see. And spirituality is becoming less and less. They took a poll in America where at least 10% of the population is now not interested in religion. It's diminishing. It's actually diminishing, yeah. So God has to put brakes on it, as they say. So by doing this, he hopefully people wake up and say, what in the world is going on? All of a sudden we don't have, imagine Apple closed, that means there's no smartphones being produced, So as long as they have stock, one thing, but once they run out of stock, there's no smartphones, there's no cars. I heard Hyundai closed their plant, and not only that, not just Hyundai, but I heard also Europe says they're running out of car parts, obviously made in China. So could you imagine what's going to be right now, but in a couple of months, you can't buy a car because there are no cars. And then until they get up working and so on. Yeah, it's a punishment for the entire world in general.
Because they're not allowing their workers to leave their homes to go to...
Of course. Yeah, that's why the factories are closed. Nobody's showing up. The only one shows up is the coronavirus. Yeah.
It's interesting that in the Hong Kong protests that they've been having since June, only at the end of November, they started with huge signs in the crowds in Chinese, and underneath it said, "Heaven will destroy the CCP." Heaven.
Yeah, yeah. I'm hoping that's one of the reasons for this, is that because the China is one of the last of the countries that is really communist. Even Russia's not communist. Russia's just a dictatorship under Putin, but Russia's not communist. China is, and that's a tremendous evil. That's a tremendous
They
evil.
also have this organ harvesting. 90,000 people a year whose organs are ripped out.
Yeah, they also have a lot of abductions, kidnapping of children and so on. I don't even know all the stuff goes on in China, but it's really a bad place. Yeah.
Do you really think that Gideon Sar would bring more the Jews closer to God than Bibi?
I want to tell you something. It's not that he will do it, okay? But he will be open toward that suggestion, and he will allow how you can bring Jews back to God? I'll tell you. It's amazing how simple it is. Not by compulsion. That's the wrong way. I want to give a whole shiur on this. The way to do that is to give all the kiruv organizations money, because they're very successful You see, their problem is they don't have money. But what happens if you give each of these organizations millions of dollars? Lev Lachem, Arachim, whatever, Eshetora, Yiboneh. I need some commission on that. Right? If you gave them money, as it is, they're doing fabulous jobs. I mean, take a look at an organization called Shuvu, right? Shuvu has great schools. Many Israelis want to send their kids to Shuvu because there's no drugs, there's no guns. It's a great place. Shuvu has tremendous problems fighting the government to get a building and all that. But what happens if a government was promoting these places by giving them money and not standing in their way? You're not forcing people to be observant at all. But if you bring somebody to Torah, guess what? The Torah will light his fire. That's what the promise is in the Talmud. You see? And it's not only that. What happens if you introduce Judaism into the public schools? Why not? Why can't they introduce, they do that in every school in the world. You go to China, guess what? You're going to learn all about Mao Tse, right? Every country in the world introduces their values and their ideologies. So why don't they do it here? Here you can't find, Arabs, all of them learn the Quran, and the Hadith and all that kind of stuff, It's only in the Arab Rav that they don't touch anything Jewish. So you could change the whole Israeli society, I guarantee you, in 5 years. That's all it is. Give them money, and promote it. Don't serve as an obstacle. And you'll be amazed. And I want to tell you something. If you do that to Israel, right? Or again, not by compulsion, right? Then this will spread to the rest of the world. Even America, yes. Because people look at Israel as a model. That's right. And remember one thing. There will be Siyata Dishmaya. Heaven, divine assistance. Because once something is redemption, then God will assist. That's the most important element of all. Yeah, the Jewish people can change, I hold, in 5 years.
But you think Gideon Sar will do this?
Yes. Yeah.
Two things. Could you comment on the explosion of anti-Semitism worldwide and how it relates to Mashiach? And two, are we still looking towards the potential of Gog and Magog, or has that taken place? Okay.
Question one. Okay. That's interesting. They just had a Holocaust forum, 75th anniversary for the liberation, right? Do you know something interesting about that? Over 40 dignitaries showed up. That's historic. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. Two things. One, is that this is a precursor to the Mashiach. Because when the Mashiach comes, all the nations of the world will send their kings and prime ministers, because the Jews have done the tikkun, right? That's what it says in the Navi. And it says in the world will recognize that I am God. More than that, I sanctify the Jewish people, and I am in their midst. Who's not going to want to come to Israel and bow down before all these tzaddikim? So you're looking at a precursor, aren't you? That's really what happened. And the second thing I believe is God just did a tremendous chesed for the goyim. You know what that is? Because in the end of time, once the end of time arrives, God is going to come after the nations of the world for all the evil they've done against the Jews, the Holocaust, everything. So you know what God did? He says, okay, I'm going to give you guys a chance to do tshuva. How? Let's see who will come to the liberation of Auschwitz and say that they regret what they did. That's a half a tshuva. To regret something already is on the path to tshuva. So what God is doing is very interesting. He's enabling the world nations by their representation, by their prime ministers and all that, to come to an Auschwitz forum, right? That's a charata. So that's a tshuva. So that's the chesed. So when the judgment day comes, it won't be as severe. You see? That's one reason why. The second thing is, so therefore God is saying, okay, you came to here, you want to have charata, you want to regret what you did, fine. So here's what I'm going to do. Talk is cheap. I'm going to allow anti-Semitism to rise in your nations. Let's see what you do now. Test. That's part of the reason. You know, that's part of the reason. But anyway, those are the two ideas I would share with you. Yeah.
With we spoke about, money for Kiru.
Yeah.
All the frum Jews who have Amazon businesses in the States, this is like millions and multi-millions of dollars being hurt by the China issue, and they give a lot of stuff for yeshivas, and it's just,
I mean, they're suffering.
they're going to lose a lot of money.
You should know one thing. There's a Gemara that says, if a plague comes to the city, right, then once the destroyer, the Malach HaMavis, is let loose, right, then you got to get away from the city, because he will come after you and destroy you also, even if it is a Jewish city. Why? Because here's the rule, okay? As long as you're not judged, you're safe. Even though you've done, not you personally, but even though a person has done many sins, he's safe. But the problem is sometimes when judgment period arises, right, then automatically you're judged if you're in that place. If you're in a place of a sakana, right, then automatically everybody is judged. Now, if you have nothing against you, right, in your dossier, right, nothing will happen to you. But many people have terrible sins that they've done, of which they've never been punished. There's no atonement because they've never been judged. There's no opportunity. The problem is you are now in a locale that everybody's being judged because it's a dangerous place. And therefore all of a sudden they pull out your file and say, hey, this guy's chayav misa, or this guy did a terrible sin and he's got to have his parnasa reduced. You see? Why? So really you never would have been judged had you not been living there. But since you're living there, and everybody, at the Gemara says that, once the destroyer is out there, then many people who never would have been punished because they would never have been judged are now judged, and lo and behold, they find that there are things that they've done which deserve punishment. So inadvertently, they are now being punished because they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. It's a Gemara. Therefore, right now in a makom of where China is collapsing in that sense, right? All of a sudden that is a time of judgment, right? And if heaven looks at your portfolio and they find sins for which the person would deserve an economic hardship or whatever, he will be judged at that time and he will be punished because he deserves it. But the problem is he should never have been judged, but he is because he's now at the time of judgment. That's how it works. Yeah, what about him?
They're giving tzedakah to yeshivas. Hashem is essentially destroying this thing.
Well, God takes everything into account. I mean,
How's he going to replenish that?
I don't think God has problems.
My question is, how do Jews make money from Amazon?
Yeah, that's all part of the cheshbon. It's part of the reckoning that God takes. It could be that if somebody's a big donor, you're not listening. Go ahead.
What do you think is keeping Trump from releasing power?
What?
It's a good question. I think what is keeping Trump from releasing Pollard? It's a good question. My sense is that if Pollard would be in prison, I think he would have pardoned him. The problem is that Pollard is not in prison, right? He's on probation. So maybe that's less of an incentive because he is free, technically, right? He's not in prison anymore, So maybe he feels, well, I don't know if this is a fact, but maybe he feels that since anyway he's free, it's just that his probation is very tough and actually in many ways totally unfair. For some reason he's not thinking about that. But I really wonder if part of the onslaught of the Democrats against Trump is for the sin of him not removing Pollard. Because God is adding, you see, there's a certain amount of punishment that Trump has to go through for many reasons. But one of them is he's not doing his complete job. His job is to help the Jews, to free them, to give them back Israel, protect them against the enemies, and so on, and really make them successful and so on. That's a heavy burden. And if he's negligent on any of that, he will be punished. But he won't be overthrown. He'll still be doing what he does. But so in other words, it could be that the Democrats, just as an example, maybe could never have put together, such a case against them, But part of the reason why they were successful is because part of it is a punishment to Trump. You see what I'm saying? And maybe part of that is, why aren't you releasing Pollard, or at least free him from this nonsense? How can you? Well, the reasons why they're doing this is insane. That he still remembers secrets for 30 years as if they were relevant today. I mean, give me a break, No, it's basically anti-Semitism, which is terrible, and so on. So that could be part of the idea. Yeah.
So you mentioned using Egypt. We need to study Egypt as the model for...
Yeah, the redemption
Right.
process.
And you mentioned the Poshet, the darkness as one of the things that...
Enlightening things for the Jews.
Right. So how do we deal with the 80%? Rashi brings that...
Yeah. That was, I think I gave that share 2 weeks ago. So I would refer you to that share. What the 80% was all about, and why it happened, and so on, and why they died, So I don't want to go into all share again, but any other question? Yeah.
It's kind of a little bit different. I noticed that there's tremendous amount of earthquakes going on right now. Tremendous amount of changes going on with the earth. How does this all fit in?
You're talking about earthquakes?
Yeah, there's been...
There's a Yerushalmi. The Gemara in Yerushalmi says very interesting. One of the I think one of the Tanoim, whatever, was speaking to Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, who was pretty knowledgeable, to say the least. So he asked him. Interesting. He asked him. He said, "Why are there earthquakes?" Whatever he called it in Hebrew. Rash or whatever. Do you know what Eliyahu Hanavi told him? He said, earthquakes come as a punishment for homosexuality. That's what Eliyahu Hanavi said to this individual. Yeah.
And that's why it's happening all over the world right now?
Yeah, in some sense.
Every week, 2 weeks I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's the, yeah. But that's what Eliyahu Hanavi said, and we can believe Eliyahu Hanavi. He's got tremendous connections in heaven, say the least. Yeah.
You mentioned that you feel that the anti-Semitism around the world is a result of Hashem saying, what are you really going to do about all this?
That's one of the reasons. It's more than that.
Right, but my question to you is, if you even look now at the two people that Trump got rid of, that Vin,
Oh, Vin, yeah, those two guys.
That sold Vin also, both of them are Jews, by the way.
Vinman is Jewish?
Yes, Vin's Jewish.
Okay, yeah.
He's a Ukrainian Jew.
Okay.
And so is that ambassador.
Sandline? Sondline, whatever his name is.
Sondline. He's also a Jew.
Okay.
So my question to you is, could it be possible, you say that it has to, the Jews will come here as a result of the economy, et cetera, but it could be possible that Hashem is setting up this anti-Semitism, because ultimately, look, Jews won't leave. To actually get Jews out. If you look at the talkbacks, if you go into Fox News, or you go into Breitbart News, and you look at the talkbacks, you're seeing the anti-Semitism growing by them pointing out. They all point out, like, look what tribe is really causing all this against Trump. Because you can look at Cohen, his lawyer, right?
Yeah.
And you're seeing an increase in that, and it could just be could it be Hashem saying, listen, you're not going to get out any other way unless.
Well, I mentioned. I meant what you're suggesting. I had mentioned. I said one of the reasons for the anti-Semitism is God has to shake up the Jews by reminding them, by the way, this is not your place. Go to Israel. Means he's beginning to alert, because everybody's very comfortable here. Everybody's here to make a living, great living, got 4 cars in the garage and all that stuff. And what God is doing is he's telling the Jews through the anti-Semitism, and by the way, you are still in Golos, this is not your country, and I'll show you by having anti-Semitism rise in America and in Europe. Yeah, I said that, what you're saying now, which is definitely true. Yeah.
I have a few questions. I don't know if I can ask them all, but my first question is,
Can you speak louder?
You want to move forward, maybe?
Because
First of all, I just want to say that I'm really excited. I've been following your shares on YouTube since before the election of Trump. And
wow, that's like 4.5 years ago. 4 years.
And I listened to all your classes, and I've never been to an actual one, so I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I
always have questions when you give your classes and I can't ask them. So you talk a lot about the Erev Rav.
Yes.
It's a little disturbing to me because what I thought and what I learned was that the Erev Rav were these sorcerers of Paro that were not quite sure who's right because they were doing stuff, and then eventually when they saw, okay, they went out, then they're like, okay, they're probably right, let's go with them. So they weren't the Jews, but they always pulled the Jews, the stragglers, the weaker people with them to make trouble. Right?
Okay.
So today, to call people that are just, that are secular, that are right-wing and care about the country, to call them Erev Rav, like,
let me answer you.
have a really hard time.
So let me answer you.
Yeah.
You are mistaken about what an Erev Rav is. That's your fundamental mistake. What is an Erev Rav? An Erev Rav is not an identity of somebody, it's an ideology. You see, the origin of the Erev Rav is Esav. When Yaakov said, right, save me, Hatzileni no, miyad ochi miyad Esav, right? So the question is, he said, save me from my brother from Esav. Now why did he have to double up on that? We know Esav is his brother. He should just have said, save me from Esav, period. And the idea to that is that what he said was very important. He said, save me from my brother when Esav comes disguised as my brother who wants to help me, but really wants to destroy me. And then save me from my brother when he comes as Esav, really wants to destroy me. An Erev Rav is an ideology that can be manifest in any Jew or anybody. Somebody who wants to destroy the unique bond or the identity actually of the Jewish people, and he is a leader, he's an Erev Rav. You see, that's the concept of an Erev Rav. You see, the same thing with Amalek. There's no Amaleks today. They died a long time ago. There's no nation called Amalek, but it's the ideology of Amalek that's called Amalek. And whoever possesses that is an Amaleki. You see what I'm saying? The Nazis were Amalek. Not because they came from Amalek. I mean, maybe they did. I wouldn't know genealogically. It goes back thousands of years. But the Nazis in Mach Shemam are Amalekis. Why? Because they possess the ideology of an Amalek. And if you want to know what the ideology of Amalek is, listen to my shir, which I gave in Yibona last year, on what an Amaleki really is, what the ideology is, and why God hates them so much. You see? So that's the answer to your question. You're looking at individuals as a particular kind of identity, but that's not what makes them an Erev Rav, right? What makes them an Erev Rav is they want to destroy the bond which exists and makes the Jews unique. And that is that Torah, God, is what makes the Jews unique. And they're the ones who did the Chet HaEgel, which to destroy the bond that Jews have with God. You see? Okay? That's the answer to your question. Sure. And continue the great work. Listen to that shir.
It's amazing, because the world is so insane, and you just give such rational, reasonable, explanations for what's happening, and it's just this beautiful.
Yeah, it's almost like you can say to yourself, how come I didn't think about that?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
You talked about, I'm sorry, can I ask
What? You want what? Yeah, okay, one more.
You talked about the territories of getting back our territories.
Yeah.
If you look at the biblical territories, we include a lot of Lebanon, a lot of Jordan,
Yes.
a lot of Syria.
Yeah, but that's Messianic.
Okay, so
That will only be after Mashiach ben David comes.
So you're saying Mashiach ben David is 10 years away? Is that what you said?
That's what the Zohar says. It's astounding, isn't it?
It's astounding, but it's
But look what's happening. I mean, Trump came out of nowhere. And he's doing what he did. Nobody could have predicted what he's doing for Eretz Israel. Who would have predicted that? Nobody. In fact, they all called him an anti-Semite in the beginning. I said it's ridiculous. I predicted that he would win 1 month after he announced his candidacy. And I said, you guys have no idea what he's going to do. He's going to be the greatest friend Israel has ever had. I said that 4.5 years ago. Yeah. Yeah, well, you heard it. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And it's based on the hashkafa. That's what it's based on. Because whatever reason, I knew that who he was. And I said, Esav is coming back, and it's going to be absolutely beyond belief, and it is. Yeah, it is.
One more question. This whole concept of the Democrats, of the secular Jews, that are Jew haters and promoters of anti-Israel and all this policy, or on the other hand, just a lot of very secular Jews that have no concept and no understanding of what spirituality is, because spirituality is a term that's just thrown very loosely. And and they're well-meaning, but they are so lost within the lies of the Democrats, and that everything is permissible. In order to be good, you have to allow everything to be. What happens to them? What happens to them? I mean, it's my family. What happens?
You mean what happened to all the liberal Jews?
To these liberal Jews, totally secular, really good people, doing lots of good things. But on the Chavero, they're wonderful.
What will happen to them is what happens to all Jews at the ends of heaven. They will come back.
But are they part of it? Do they get to be in the process?
Yes, of course.
Redemption? Do they have no interest in coming to Israel? Why would they want to come to Israel?
The tikkun of the Jews now, which is coming to an end, right? Because I said 98% of the tikkun is complete. That's why we're at the end of Ikvus the Mashiach. The tikkun of the Jews, strange as it sounds, doesn't come from the secular Jews, because they are complete oinus. They are amaratzim. They don't know anything. And if they don't know anything, then their sin doesn't count as an obstruction to the tikkun. Because you have to have free will. Part of free will is you have to know that it's a sin. The tikkun of the Jews comes from, strangely enough, the Charedim. Because they know what the sin is, so when they do a mitzvah, there's a tikkun. You see? That doesn't mean if a liberal Jew does a mitzvah, no, of course it is. But the liberal Jew cannot create an avla, a kilkel, a damage, because he's an amoritz. And because of that, unless God decides that this he should have known.
Because today you can go online and find anything out. So
Yeah.
do they have some responsibility for not learning?
They do, but that already, only God knows. If they could have known or does know, we cannot possibly judge them, But by and large, a great deal of the Jews today are Amaratzim, and therefore they're honest. They don't know anything. How many Jews have been brought up in homes that aren't religious at all? So, maybe, only God can judge them. We can't, and so on. You know why Jews are liberal? You know why they're liberal?
Yeah, because they're Rahmanim, Chasadim.
Yeah, that's true, but there's another reason. Because the Jews have been in exile for 2,000 years and have suffered. So the only political ideology that they feel they can survive is liberalism, because everything goes. Conservatives are not good for Jews because they're strict. But a liberal says everything goes. Want to do your thing, do it. So a liberal ideology, a political ideology, is the safest form of government for a Jew. That's why most Jews have become liberal. It's to survive. Interesting. Okay? Next.
One question from this side.
From this side, yes.
It's very good that you are optimistic about future and the
yes, I'm very optimistic.
And peaceful plan. However, you did not mention fact that this plan supposed to give up about 70% of ancestral Jewish land.
Who said? Oh, Trump.
Or by peace plan.
Yeah, but it'll never happen. I said it will never happen. It is only a device to get Arabs to say no, and then they'll let the Jews annex everything.
You rely only on Arabs, but if Jews will say yes during the election or whatever,
I want to tell you something. God will not allow the Arabs to say yes. It's not the Arabs.
So you rely on Arabs, no?
No, I relied on God saying to the Arabs, you cannot say yes.
But you do not afraid the Jews majority will say yes to this plan, even if they do not have.
It doesn't make a difference what the Jews say. God is in control.
Of course.
No, not of course. That's why this is what's going to happen. It's not the Jews. Who cares what it doesn't make a difference. Once God has decided to end the entire journey of Tikkun, then you have no free will anymore. It must end. There's no, like God told, there's an end time that must happen. No force in the universe can stop it. That's what God is, right? And once God has decided that we are entering before a Messianic era, it's over with. There's nothing you can do, you see, except go along with the program. See?
It's